Welcome to the Den of Dissent. This is a show where we challenge the current culture and mainstream talking points of the day. What is the news telling us? What is the culture telling us? Where is our civilization headed? And by what standard do we judge these issues? Do you agree or do you dissent? Let's find out. Mic check. Yes, we are back. Once again, it's been a while. Sorry. Just had a lot of technical difficulties. Been trying to get some things situated, but we are here. We are in the building. So today is an intro, as always, to another show that I did with Nick Bryant, who is the author of The Franklin Scandal. Check it out. Okay. This is a heavy book. When I say heavy, I mean deep. Okay. And so I did this show. I've been sitting on the show and I didn't get to release it because of some technical issues and just time, really. And we talked about the Epstein saga a little bit. And it's funny that when I did this interview, you know, Epstein was still circulating. The story was still circulating a little bit, but not as much as it is now. So right before you got all of this talk and commotion about Epstein within the last 2 months, I actually did this interview previous to that. But it's just funny that I did it before all of this Epstein stuff started bubbling up again. It's been in the atmosphere for a little bit, but over the past few months, it started to heat up because of this the back and forth with the files being released and all of that. So anyway, I interviewed Nick Bryant about his book, The Franklin Scandal, and we talked about Epstein, obviously. So he talks about, some really dark stuff. So, in essence, what we're talking about here is grown adults abusing people that are younger than them. Okay, if you catch my drift, little people, or people that are not their age, far younger. Okay, I'm putting this on YouTube, so I gotta dance a little bit with the language. So that's what we're talking about, and that's what his book, The Franklin Scandal, is about. Okay, go get this. It's dark, it's deep, it's depressing, but it's real. It's out there. So I want to do a intro video to some of the topics that we're talking about. And as I read the book, I just started going down some paths. And so I want to explain some things to the casual observer of world events who don't necessarily understand the deep things of the world, and how the world works. And so in the Franklin Scandal, he starts off talking about his journey. And I just want to read you some portions of the things that he experienced in his journey and some things that I found interesting. So let's start here. I'm going to pull up some pages that I actually got on screen for you to see. Excuse me while I pull up my exhibit. So we're going to go through a few pages, and then I'm going to bring up a few articles, and then you will get to see the interview after this video. Okay. So here's what I thought to be interesting. Let me just actually, instead of reading it from the book, I'm just going to read it on screen. So, in the intro, he talks about what led him down this path of finding out about the elite and higher power circles, people that operate in higher circles of power in government and outside of government. But he starts off with his confusion and this maze that he went through, and he's doing some self-reflection in the introduction to the book. So he says, in addition to denial, now this is on let me see, this is in the introduction to the book. So he says, in addition to denial and the preservation of the reputations, a third factor that dooms many child abuse investigations and abets corrupt ones is that The victims are often from disadvantaged backgrounds, and the adult luring the child frequently introduces the underage victim to drugs or alcohol, further eroding his or her credibility. Moreover, the abuser can have powerful allies in law enforcement, government, and the media who decide that the sordid details are too hot to handle. Add into the mix the public's understandable squeamishness toward the entire subject of, you see the word on there, it's a P word, and it ends with an A, and it has to do with adults abusing people that are below age. Okay? It's the P word. So he says, and we arrive at the perfect recipe for a cover-up. The reality is that many perpetrators are not shady men in dirty, threadbare trench coats living in seedy hotels, but are, in fact, so-called pillars of our community. Until our society addresses these facts and its institutions are willing to face embarrassment instead of heaping more abuse upon victims, our national shame of widespread child abuse and its cover-up is unlikely to end. So he's saying that, you know, there's a lot to, the reason why some of this stuff doesn't get exposed is because the people that are engaged in these actions are tied to powerful circles. You have people connected to law enforcement, people connected to government and the media. And so this is why some of these stories get squashed. As you can see, the Epstein thing was around for years, okay? Billionaires, elites, people in high-profile areas of society getting away with some of these crimes. So a lot of times these people are backed by the state, they're backed by media, they're backed by government, and so forth. And he says that, you know, the public, it's not even something that the public wants to delve into because it's something so ugly that the public doesn't even want to touch this. A lot of people don't even want to believe that, hey, there's people in your government that might be engaged in this activity that goes all the way up to the top. You don't even want to believe that. And another thing you don't want to believe is that these crimes are being squashed by the very people that you vote for, and they have to do with children. That's an ugly thing to digest. That's a very hard thing to digest. And he says, I thought this was interesting. The perpetrators are not shady men in dirty trench coats. No, some of these men are dressed in suits. They're eloquent, and they're in the highest positions of society. These are some of the perpetrators that we're talking about, which makes it very ugly indeed. Another thing I thought interesting in this book was, as we go on to page, these are screenshots I took of the book. I think this was page 4 of the Franklin scandal. So he says, initially I embarked on a dark odyssey, skeptical and bold, and it left me utterly anguished. I wasn't so much anguished by the threats and intimidation I endured delving into the arcane mysteries of the universe, but rather by the realization of its existence, a universe that encompasses the refined industrial destruction of children and its cover-up by the very state and federal authorities who have pledged to protect children from the depravity of evil men. The children and our society as a whole have been betrayed. What else did I find interesting? So in on page 10 in the book, he talks about the how he found out about this group called the Finders and how this border customs, he got this border customs report from someone that was telling him about the U.S. Customs and how there was a report of these children being kidnapped by this group called the Finders, and how these how this ring of pedos, okay, was trafficking, you know, these kids. And when the customs, the U.S. Customs Department discovered this, they referred the investigation, I think, to authorities in Florida, and the federal government sent, I don't know if it was, I think it was the CIA in right, to take a look. And the CIA basically squashed the investigation into this child trafficking and abuse ring that was taking place. So the CIA and federal government, I think there was some FBI involved, that squashed the investigation. So in here he says, he talks about that custom report, and he says the customs report, written by Special Agent Ramon Martinez, recounted a sordid, horrific cluster of events. On February 4th, 1987, a concerned citizen notified the Tallahassee Police Department he had observed 6 white children, poorly dressed, bruised, dirty, and behaving like wild animals in a Tallahassee park. The children were accompanied by 2 well-dressed white males driving a white 1979 Dodge van with Virginia plates. The Tallahassee police responded to a call and took the children and adults into custody. The adults refused to cooperate, and one produced a business card that stated he planned to exercise his constitutional right to remain silent. Police officers noted that the children, whose ages ranged from 3 to 6, could not adequately identify themselves on their custodians and were unaware of the function and purpose of telephones, televisions, and toilets. The children also said that they were not allowed to live indoors and were given food only as a reward. The Tallahassee police charged that the 2 adults with felony child abuse and were held on $100,000 bond. The children were placed in protective custody. Police officers found documents in the van that enabled them to tentatively identify the 2 adults and partially identify the children. They also found documents containing 2 Washington, D.C. addresses. The Tallahassee police suspected child P, I don't want to say the word. They contacted U.S. Customs Service, USCS, which has a child P, how can I describe this word? Footage of undressed children, and protection unit. Shortly thereafter, Detective James Bradley of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department contacted Special Agent Ramon Martinez of the USCS. Detective Bradley indicated that the Tallahassee arrests were probably linked to a case that he was investigating in the D.C. area involving a cult called the Finders. An informant had told Bradley that the Finders operated various businesses out of a warehouse in D.C. and housed children at a second warehouse. Okay? It goes on to say, the information was specific in describing blood rituals and sexual orgies involving children. And as yet, unsolved murder in which the Finders may be involved, wrote Martinez in his report. Bradley told Martinez that the Tallahassee arrests of the 2 adults for child abuse were the critical mass he needed for warrants to search the 2 warehouses. And on February 6th, the MPD, accompanied by the USCS, executed search warrants on the warehouses. Now, he goes on to say that Martinez and the MPD officers also found a large collection of photographs. A number of the photos were of children undressed, and one appeared to be a child on display in a way that accented the child's parts. An MPD officer then presented Martinez with the photo album. The album contained photos of adults and children dressed in white sheets, slaughtering 2 goats. The photos portrayed the slaughter and disembowelment, skinning and dismemberment of the goats by the children. The photos showed the removal of the male goat's testes and the removal of baby goats from the female goat's womb, and a presentation of a goat's head to one of the children. So this is so dark. It's so ugly. And he goes on to say that the individual further advised me. He talks about an individual, a detective, I think. He said the individual advised me of circumstances which indicated that the investigation into the activity of the Finders had become a CIA internal matter, Agent Martinez concluded in his report. That's what I should have said. Agent Martinez, who reported this. says that the investigation into the activity had become a CIA internal matter. The MPD report has been classified secret and was not available for review. I was advised that the FBI had withdrawn from the investigation several weeks prior and that the FBI Counterintelligence Division had directed MPD not to advise the FBI Washington field office of anything that had transpired. No further information will be available. No further action will be taken. So Nick Bryant says, wow, after I finished reading the USCS report, the U.S. Customs report, Buffalo Springfield's For What It's Worth came to mind. There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. So, yeah. And this is why he decided to write the Franklin scandal, which I guess builds upon this book by a senator or a congressman whose name was John DeCamp, who wrote the Franklin cover-up. So that was the first book that was written, but Nick Bryant went into deeper detail about that because he started reading about the Franklin cover-up, and then he started to see some fishy things in that story. So he said, I'm gonna touch on this, investigate this, and he interviewed John DeCamp, and that's what led him to write this book, The Franklin Scandal. So let's go on and talk about some other things I found interesting in the book. He says the Franklin cover-up made two major assertions that were absent from Conspiracy of Silence. So Conspiracy of Silence was a documentary that was made, I think it was in the 90s, and it talks about these high-profile people in politics that were touching underage people, okay? Kids. It's so hard to navigate on YouTube and these platforms. So these were politicians that were involved with abusing underage people, and there was a ring, and they were trafficking them, and having parties and all of this stuff with these underage people. And so this is what that documentary talked about. Quick interruption, ladies and gentlemen. I just remembered that as I'm on the topic of the documentary Conspiracy of Silence, I figured I would play a clip of the documentary with the author John DeCamp, who wrote the book, The Franklin Cover-Up. So this will give you a summary of what this story is about. And it's a quick clip, but if you want to watch the full documentary, you can go on YouTube and just type it in the search box, Conspiracy of Silence. But let me just play this quick clip so you can get a general idea of what this case was about.
A Republican from the Midwest, Lawrence E. King, is serving a 15-year prison sentence for a multi-million-dollar fraud. But financial crime is only half the story. This is the true story of Lawrence King. It is the story of an evil at the heart of America, of a cover-up at the highest level. One man is attempting to uncover the full story. John DeCamp is among the most highly decorated Vietnam veterans. A former Republican state senator in Lincoln, Nebraska, he is now a lawyer fighting the legacy of Lawrence King's evil network.
It's a web of intrigue that starts in our Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, one of the most respected institutions in the United States, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House, involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
John DeCamp lays the blame for the contamination of Boys Town on the one-time leader of the National Black Republican Council, Larry King.
Larry King was the fastest rising black star in the entire Republican Party of the United States during all of the 1980s. And he was also one of the most evil individuals in this country in terms of being a dealer of children, in terms of being a thief, 40 million that they documented he stole, and in terms of using and compromising and corrupting one after another politicians.
Now, he says the book cited victim debriefings stating that the ring was enmeshed in Satanism. This is what John DeCamp's book says. And it also implied that the ring was connected to the CIA. DeCamp, a seasoned lawyer, presented tidbits of compelling evidence here and there, and I was intrigued. Both Conspiracy of Silence and the Franklin cover-up implicated one, Lawrence E. King, Jr. of Omaha. So he was also called Larry King, Jr. as the primary pimp of a nationwide pedophile ring. Okay, I'm going to say it. So Larry King was like a high-profile guy back in, I think it was the 90s or 80s, that was in the Republican Party. Now, he says, throughout the 1980s, the middle-aged King, tall and corpulent, had been described as a GOP high roller and the fastest rising African-American star in the Republican Party. He was a vice chairman for finance of the National Black Republican Council, a sanctioned affiliate of the Republican National Committee. King also ardently campaigned for the 1998 presidential bid of his personal friend, George H.W. Bush. In the 1988 flurry of name-dropping, King told a reporter for Omaha's Weekly Metropolitan of his lofty connections atop the political food chain. I know some of the people I admire aren't very popular. Ed Meese, the late Bill Casey of the CIA, and I love former Chief Justice Burger. Those are the people I really like to talk to. Bill Casey, I thought so very highly of him. What else? He goes on in this book to talk about Larry King and how Larry King had an array, diverse business ventures, but his primary day job was the manager of an Oklahoma credit union created to provide loans for Omaha's underserved black community. Now, Larry King later got arrested for fraud on November 4th, 1988. Federal agents descended on Franklin Credit Union and the National Credit Union Administration would ultimately conclude that $39.4 million had been stolen. King would be indicted on 40 counts that included conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Federal law required annual audits of federally regulated credit unions, but King had possessed the political juice to stave off audits. Now, Nick Bryan, I just want to read you some of these pages from the introduction of the book so you can get an understanding of what this is about and how this will touch on some of the Epstein stuff that's going on as well. Now, Nick Bryant interviewed one of the victims of this pedophile ring. This guy who was abused. His name was Paul Bonacci, and he eventually got to meet up with one of the victims and talk to Paul Bonacci. And in the book, he says that Bonacci related a tale that was eerily similar to Nelson, who was another victim in this whole child, abuse thing. He says, in fact, he named the same intelligence officer as had Nelson. So I guess Nelson had named an intelligence officer that was involved with this. He also said Larry King had been the ringleader of a nationwide pandering network. You know what? I'm gonna use the word pandering network instead of the other word, the other P word. He said Larry King was a ringleader of this nationwide P network, had attended satanic rituals, and had pillaged Boys Town for victims. So Boys Town was where Larry King, this high-profile GOP high roller, this is where he was I guess, getting some of these underage boys from Boys Town. And he goes on to say, though child abuse charges were never brought against King, Paul Bonacci and John DeCamp pursued federal civil lawsuits against King and other alleged pedos Bonacci named as his assailants. What else? Okay, so this guy, Paul Bonacci, ended up, he had a federal case that was going after Larry King. And there's a section of the book that talks about a judge that I think awarded Paul Bonacci, one of the victims. I think it was over six figures. I think it might have been $1 million or something. So he says in the book, Judge Orbaum wrote in his decision between December 1980 and 1988, the complaint alleges the defendant King continually subjected the plaintiff to repeated sexual assaults, false imprisonments, infliction of extreme emotional distress, organized and directed satanic rituals, forced the plaintiff to scavenge for children to be part of the defendant King's sexual abuse and pornography ring, forced the plaintiff to engage in numerous sexual contacts with the defendant, King, and others, and participate in deviant sexual games and masochistic orgies with other people that were underage. And it doesn't say that in the book. It says something else. But again, I'm dancing around the words. Yeah. So this is what was going on. And so Paul Bonacci wrote there was another gentleman by the name of, I forget his name. Anyway, if you go into the book, you can see affidavits that he has in the back of the book with victims that wrote about their testimony. You can see articles. You can see victims talking about how they recanted their original story and then went back and wrote an affidavit saying that they lied about recanting. And they're saying that the original story that they told about themselves, about them being abused was true. But they felt threatened for their lives and their families' lives. And so they, I guess, took the stand and said that it was a lie. But in reality, it wasn't a lie. So you have one individual, his last name is Broner, I forget his first name. And he says that he was threatened. And so he lied to the authorities and about being abused by these high profile people. And he went and reported in an affidavit, testified in an affidavit to John DeCamp that indeed he was abused by these high profile people, but he was being threatened. And you can read some of those affidavits in the book, which is just, it's I don't know. It's so disgusting. It's dirty. I think what's most worrisome to me is that, our government is involved in some of this. That's what is disgusting to me. And then, well, obviously children. So anyway, as I was preparing for this interview and for this intro, there was some articles that I came across. One of them in particular, I read this years ago, and I never really delved too deep into it until now. I decided to read the whole article. And this came about when I started reading about the Franklin scandal. So this is an article by the Washington Times from June 29th, 1989. Look at the headline on this article. For those that aren't watching, let me read it to you. Okay? The Washington Times, Thursday, June 29th, 1989. It says, homosexual prostitution inquiry ensnares VIPs with Reagan Bush. Okay? It says under it, the subtitle, Call Boys took a midnight tour of White House. So I'm just going to read some of this. Now, it says, a homosexual prostitution ring is under investigation by federal and district authorities and includes among its clients key officials of the Reagan and Bush administrations, military officers, congressional aides, and U.S. and foreign businessmen with close social ties to Washington's political elite. Documents obtained by the Washington Times reveal one of the ring's high-profile clients was so well-connected, in fact, that he could arrange a middle-of-the-night tour of the White House for his friends on Sunday, July 3rd of last year. Among the 6 persons on the extraordinary 1 a.m. tour were 2 male prostitutes. Federal authorities, including the Secret Service, are investigating criminal aspects of the ring and have told male prostitutes and their homosexual clients that a grand jury will deliberate over the evidence throughout the summer, the Times learned. Reporters for this newspaper examined hundreds of credit card vouchers drawn on both corporate and personal cards and made payable to the escort service operated by the homosexual ring. Many of the vouchers were run through a so-called submerchant account of the Chambers Funeral Home by the son of the owner without the company's knowledge. Among the client names contained in the vouchers and identified by prostitutes and escort operators are government officials, locally based U.S. military officers, businessmen, lawyers, bankers, congressional aides, and other professionals. Editors of the Times said that the newspaper would print only names of those found to be in sensitive government posts or positions of influence. There is no intention of publishing names or facts about the operation merely for titillation, said Wesley Pruden, managing editor of the Times. The officer, I'm trying to blow it up so you guys can read this. The officer of U.S. Attorney J.B. Stevens, former deputy White House counsel to President Reagan, is coordinating federal aspects of the inquiry, but refused to discuss the investigation or grand jury action. Several former White House colleagues of Mr. Stevens are listed among clients of the homosexual prostitution ring, according to the credit card records, and those persons have confirmed that charges were theirs. Mr. Stevens' office, after first saying it would cooperate with the Times inquiry, withdrew the offer late yesterday and also declined to say whether Mr. Stevens would recuse himself from the case because of possible conflict of interest. At least one highly placed Bush administration official and a wealthy businessman who procured homosexual prostitutes from the escort services operated by the ring are cooperating with the investigation, several sources said. Among clients who charge homosexual prostitutes services on major credit cards over the past 18 months are Charles K. Dutcher, former associate director of presidential personnel in the Reagan administration, and Paul R. Bollock, Labor Secretary Elizabeth Dole's political personnel liaison to the White House. In the 1970s, Mr. Dutcher was a congressional aide to former Rep. Robert Bauman, Maryland Republican, who resigned from the House after he admitted having engaged in sexual liaisons with teenage male prostitutes. Mr. Dutcher, who also worked on the staff of Vice President Dan Quayle when he represented an Indiana district in the House. A charge was also discovered against the credit card of a former White House staffer who prepared the president's daily news summary in the Reagan administration. Todd A. Blodgett said he had not made the charge. One of the ring's big spending clients is Craig J. Spence, Washington socialite and international trade consultant. According to the documents and interviews with operators and prostitutes who say they engaged in sexual activities with Mr. Spence spent upwards of $20,000 a month for male prostitutes who provided sex to him and his friends, and said to include military personnel who also acted as his bodyguards. It was Mr. Spence who arranged the nocturnal tour of the Reagan White House. Repeated attempts to reach Mr. Spence by telephone, fax machine, and personal visits to his home, were unsuccessful. Goes on to say, and I'm going to try to wrap it up. I'm not going to read the whole article, but you should. Credit card vouchers confirm that Mr. Spence charged thousands of dollars on American Express and Visa cards, sometimes making $600 charges against his cards several times a day, drawn in behalf of an escort service called Professional Services, Inc. Professional Services is one of the several umbrella companies used operators supplying male prostitutes as escorts, as advertised in Washington tabloid newspapers and the telephone yellow pages. I thought this last part was interesting. It says members of major news organizations also procured escort services from the Ring. Credit card documents show these include Stanley Mark Tapscott, who was an assistant managing editor of the Washington Times. Mr. Tapscott, whose resignation on June 20th was accepted. I'm sorry, this is not the part that I was thinking of. It says, let me read one more interesting part of this. The documents show that a number of clients, lawyers, doctors, and business executives use corporate credit cards to procure escort services, and that a number of military officers from the United States and allied countries, including one foreign officer using a Department of Defense credit card, charged male escort services. One former top-level Pentagon officer said that for the past 8 years, military and civilian intelligence authorities have been concerned that a nest of homosexuals at top levels of the Reagan administration may have been penetrated by Soviet-backed espionage agents posing as male prostitutes, said one former top-level Pentagon official. A major concern, said the former official with long-time ties to top-ranking military intelligence officers, was that hostile foreign intelligence services were using young male prostitutes to compromise top administration homosexuals, thus making them subject to blackmail. He goes on to say, we have known for many, many years that there's a department of the KGB, Soviet intelligence, whose job it is to prey on sexual deviants, said retired Lieutenant General Daniel Graham, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Because closet homosexuals in government service can easily be turned through blackmail for espionage purposes, General Graham said, we have always in intelligence tried very hard not to be giving classified information to known homosexuals. Those interviewed by the Times confirmed there were blackmail attempts by male prostitutes who wanted money and other favors to protect clients' secret sexual lives. So, yeah, I mean, just the idea that there's midnight tours and call boys going into the White House at 9 a.m. and, people working in the administration and on these campaigns affiliated with, our presidents and different politicians. I mean, it just seems unbelievable. So this goes in, this adds on to this whole Franklin scandal. In my opinion, it when you think about the story of the Franklin scandal, can that be real? Is that something that is real because you think it's so far-fetched? Well, look at this. I mean, we're talking about call boy rings and call boys going into the White House at 1 a.m. in the morning, midnight, whatever. So once you read about something like that, then you start to say, okay, maybe it's not as far-fetched as I think it is. Okay, and so go check this article out. This is an archived article from the 80s. So, I mean, this craziness was going on back then. Okay, here's another article that I thought was interesting. It talks about Larry King, who was the guy that we talked about earlier, that Nick Bryant talks about in the Franklin scandal. So this is written in 1988. This is by the New York Times, and it's titled "A Lurid, Mysterious Scandal Begins Taking Shape in Omaha" by William Robbins, special to the New York Times. So this is an archived article. I'm trying to see how I can bring it up. So I'll just read a little bit of it. It says, for several weeks, a federal investigation has riveted attention here on a failed local credit union formed to help the poor on a $38 million that on 38 million that it is missing, and on its manager, a nationally active Republican politician whom government accuses of embezzling at least some of the funds. Now, the inquiry, joined by state investigations, is widening and has begun to take on the stark trappings of a lurid melodrama. Let me see something. There we go. Okay. Now I can blow the article up for you. It says the collapse of the credit union and the government lawsuit alleging embezzlement were the extent of the case, at least on the public record, until last Monday. Then rumors that had been circulating in Omaha for much of the last month made their way into remarks presented to the executive board of the state legislature in Lincoln. The speaker was the state senator Ernie Chambers of Omaha, who said he had received numerous reports to which he clearly gave credence that instances of child sexual and physical abuse were linked to the scandal. Mr. Chambers did not describe the nature of that linkage and has consistently declined to identify the sources of the reports, going only so far as to tell the Omaha World Herald that they were people I consider credible. But participants in a closed meeting that followed executive board's public session say he told of boys and girls, some of them from foster homes, who had been transported around the country by airplane to provide sexual favors for which they were rewarded. 3 related inquiries. The executive board, which acts for the full legislature in periods of adjournment, had been called into session to organize a committee that would investigate only the credit union's collapse. But by the end of the day, Monday, the committee with Mr. Chambers as vice chairman had been given a mandate to look into the broader case as well. I want to go down a little bit. It says, if sensation has begun to characterize the case, so has mystery. The various investigators, their efforts barely begun, declined to speak of them in detail. Mr. Chambers himself says he wants to disclose just enough to encourage those with information on the affair to give testimony before the legislative committee. As a result, there are these large gaps in public knowledge about the case, among others. If child prostitution was involved, how vast was it? If foster homes were involved, which ones? Nick O'Hara, special agent in charge of the FBI's Omaha office, says his investigation centers also on money laundering, but he will not elaborate. It says, in the executive board's public session on Monday, Mr. Chambers said the activities of Lawrence E. King, the credit union's manager for the last 18 years and central figure in its collapse, were just the tip of an iceberg, but he's not in it by himself. But Mr. Chambers added nothing that would shed light on his cryptic assertion. And yeah, it just goes on to talk about this case and gives a little detail, background information about Larry King. Again, Mr. King is a 44-year-old Omaha resident who wholly or partly owns several small businesses. He lives with his wife and school-age son in a large house in one of the city's better neighborhoods. It says he is a tall, expansive figure, well known for his costly style of dressing, lavish celebrations, and extensive travel, sometimes in chartered jets and often with an entourage of young men. He headed the national political organization Black Democrats for George McGovern, but he gained greater prominence after he switched parties a while later, serving for a time as vice chairman for the National Black Republican Council, an affiliate of the Republican Party. So, you know, he was a big, like they say in the book, a GOP high roller. And from my understanding, he also sang the national anthem at a GOP event where I think Ronald Reagan was present. And he also, I think, there's pictures of him with, I don't know if one of Ronald Reagan's relatives. I don't know if it was his daughter or so. But this article goes into this investigation a little bit. And like I said earlier, you can read the Franklin scandal to understand more about this situation. And there's a film called Conspiracy of Silence, which you can check out as well. But yeah, actually, let me pull up this article that talks about conspiracy of silence. So this was written. Let me see, when was this written? This is by the Daily Mail. This was written 2022. So it says, "Evil in the Heart of America. Shocking doc exposes mystery surrounding alleged 1988 prostitution ring, detailing child victims' horrific claims of being flown across the U.S. and abused by high-powered officials and their accusations of cover-up by the FBI. In 1980s, the alleged victims claimed a man named Larry King ran an underground club in Omaha, Nebraska, through which he trying to get all these ads out, in which he, along with the politicians and businessmen, forced children to engage in dirty things with them. In 1990, a Nebraska county grand jury concluded that the claims were a hoax, and a federal grand jury later agreed that the allegations had no base. However, in 1993, a film crew flew to the state and took to look into it further, interviewing the alleged victims and others who were said to be involved as a part of a documentary on the matter. The supposed victims told documentary makers that the government forced them into silence by threatening them, using scare tactics, and even murder, with one even alleging they killed his brother to keep him quiet. Days before the movie was supposed to premiere on the Discovery Channel, it got shut down with no explanation. And yeah, you can go check this article out as well. This is by the Daily Mail. Type in "Evil in the Heart of America." So this is about the film Conspiracy of Silence, and it goes into the whole Larry King scandal. Okay. Now, it's just, again, crazy that you have prominent people, right? High rollers in office, high profile people that are doing these kinds of things, and it's being covered up by high profile people and high circles of society, government, FBI, CIA, all of this. You know, it's very worrisome. And there was something else I wanted to pull up. But anyway, so yeah, this is Larry King. This was the guy who was involved with all this craziness. The guy that was a GOP high roller singing the national anthem at GOP events. And I found out that if you type in Larry King, Ronald Reagan, yeah, so this is Larry King has a file that's in the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. And it just gives you, like, it has copies of letters of recommendation of Larry King to, I guess, get a position in office in the White House. And so you can read some of that. Right now, it doesn't talk about the scandal that Larry King had, but it just gives you a little bit of information about Larry King, general information, letters of recommendation for Larry King, and things like that. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. But again, this is dirty stuff. This is dark stuff. Go check out some of these articles. Go look up the Franklin Scandal book, and check out the interview I did with Nick Bryant. Now, I did this video because I think this has a relationship to the whole Epstein situation. So this was going on since the 80s, right? And so when I look at the Epstein scandal, it just tells me, like, this stuff hasn't really stopped. It's been going on for a while. And it's kind of like the same kind of networks, the same playbook that these people use, right? So Epstein is just, I guess, the modern version of what was going on back then. But then again, Epstein was back. He was around in the 80s as well, doing a lot of craziness from what I've been reading. But yeah, it just shows you a pattern of behavior between people, some people in government and other high-profile people, and these networks. There's a pattern of behavior. And also in the interview with Nick Bryant, I asked him about the whole Satanism, like relationship between Satanism and this this kind of behavior, because I like to look at the spiritual aspect of things. And Nick Bryant said that, well, you know, there's a small sliver of that kind of activity as far as Satanism. You know, a lot of these people are just, you know, some of them they're deviants. And he was kind of, I guess, I don't want to say downplaying, but he basically said that the Satanism aspect was just a very tiny aspect of this whole network and this deviant behavior. Now, he talks about the Satanism in his book. And so, you know, you got some of these victims talking about goat heads and sacrifice and all this stuff. So to me, yeah, it might be, you know, most of the people that are engaged in this kind of thing probably, I don't know. They might not be Satanists, but I think there is an aspect of Satanism that has its claws into this. And even the people that aren't Satanists or whatever, guess what? It's evil behavior. So you know who it goes back to? Satan. Okay, it goes back to the devil anyway, because it's devilish behavior, whether they're doing it intentionally or not. So again, I'm gonna build on this topic a little bit. This is the intro video, and so the next video I put out will be on some Epstein information. And I just wanna what I'm gathering from all this research is that, like I said, there's a pattern of behavior. There is a system of this abuse, this corruption, this kind of deviant activity. There's a system that's in place that's doing this and promoting this kind of behavior. So check out the interview I did with Nick Bryant after this video. Go do your research, check out the book, and pray. Pray to God. Yeah, turn from your wicked ways. And I challenge the people that have been involved with some of these activities. Hey, I'm just a little man. But yeah, I challenge some of these people that were going to those midnight White House tours to turn to Jesus Christ. You too can repent and be saved. To the CIA, to the FBI officials engaged in some of this dark stuff. Yeah, you can turn around. You can repent. You can come to Jesus. Absolutely, you can. Anyway, go check the videos out. Let me know what you think. Give me some feedback. Support the show. It's all about truth. We want to view the world through a biblical lens and give truth, break down truth every day. It's a relentless pursuit of truth. That is what I am on. That's what you should be on as well. Anyway, I'm out. Peace.